My husband was away for work when my selfish mother-in-law and sister-in-law showed up at our house with lawyers. "Your husband is dead," they said coldly. "He died in a car crash, and before he died, he gave us this house. Now, you need to leave." I was shocked and confused. I tried calling my husband, David, but his phone was off. The lawyers told me to pack my things. Just when I thought I was losing everything, a figure appeared at the door and changed everything. That moment changed my life forever. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how my life took unexpected turns that tested my strength. I'm 36 years old, and I've been married to David for 8 years. We live in a charming old house in Seattle that I inherited from my parents. The house has a lot of memories, but lately, it's been a place of family conflict I didn't expect. David is a wonderful man. He's always been supportive, especially when it comes to our struggles with having a child. We both want a family, but we've faced many heartbreaking miscarriages. Each loss made me feel empty. It's so painful to lose a baby, losing the dreams we built around it. Every time I had to tell David about another miscarriage, I felt like I was hurting our love. But despite the pain, David has always been there for me. He's the kind of man who always puts others first, especially his family. His heart is huge, but sometimes I feel like I'm competing with his family for his attention. His mother, Mrs. Walters, and his sister, Sarah, don't seem to like me. The more I struggle to give David children, the more they look down on me. Sarah, especially, is difficult. She's 35, recently divorced, and has been living with our mother-in-law ever since. She depends on David for money, and every time he helps her, I feel like our life together slips away. Her son, Ethan, who's 9, is often dropped off at our house without notice. I never signed up to babysit, but that's what happens. One particularly tiring day, I found Ethan playing in our living room while I was trying to work. I checked my watch, wondering when Sarah would pick him up. Just then, Sarah walked in without knocking and looked around. "Emma, can you help Ethan with his homework? I need to run errands," she said, sitting down on the couch. "Of course, Sarah," I said, trying to hide my frustration, "but I have work to do too." She waved it off. "Oh, you'll be fine. What else do you have to do?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, I have a lot of work today." As she left the room, I couldn't help but feel like I was being treated like a maid, not a part of the family. I tried to help Ethan with his homework, but I couldn't stop thinking about the harsh comments Sarah had made. David, as usual, didn't notice the tension at home. He worked long hours to provide for his family and support me emotionally. One evening, after a tough day, he told me about something new he was working on. "I've invested $150,000 in a tech project," he said, excited. "I think it's going to work, but I'll have to cut back on helping my family for a while." Hearing that made me feel uneasy. His mom and sister had always relied on him for money, and I knew they wouldn't take the news well. I could see the anger on his mom's face and the shock on Sarah's. "What do you mean, cut back?" his mom asked, sounding upset. "We depend on you." "I know, but Emma and I need to plan for our future too," David answered gently. The next morning, after David left for work, his mom pulled me aside. "You know, dear," she whispered with venom in her voice, "if you can't give David a child, he might reconsider this whole arrangement." My heart sank, but I stayed strong. "David and I are in this together," I replied, though I felt the pressure of her words. As they left, I stood at the door, feeling the weight of their expectations crushing me. What used to be a peaceful home was now full of tension and resentment. Days passed, and the tension only grew. Sarah and Mrs. Walters kept making hurtful comments about my inability to have children, and I felt like I was disappearing in my own life. One afternoon, I was making coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a message from David saying he'd be away for a few days on business. I hoped for some peace while he was gone, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was off. That night, as I sat alone, I felt the pressure building, and little did I know, things were about to get much worse. While David was away, Sarah and Mrs. Walters were making plans that would turn my life upside down. I could feel it coming, and I knew something was about to happen. The second day David was gone, Sarah showed up unexpectedly. She knocked on the door with a sly smile. "Hey, Emma, I thought I'd check in on you. It must be lonely here without David," she said sweetly. "Yeah, it's quiet," I answered, trying to stay cautious. She stepped inside and said, "I've been thinking a lot about family lately. It's so important to have strong connections, especially when it comes to property and inheritance." I felt uneasy. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just that sometimes you have to make sure everything is in order for the future. You know, making sure things go to the right people." I tried to stay calm. "David and I have everything under control." She gave a fake smile. "Of course, just thought I'd offer some advice." After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I lay awake in bed. uneasy about what was coming. The next morning, I heard from David, and I mentioned Sarah's strange visit. I waited anxiously for his reply, but he didn't respond right away. Later that day, Mrs. Walters arrived uninvited. "Emma, dear, I just wanted to check in on you," she said, walking in without waiting for an invite. "I'm fine, Mrs. Walters, just working," I said, trying to keep things short. She ignored me and started lecturing me about family, loyalty, and sticking together. Her words felt manipulative, like she was trying to make me doubt myself. "You know, dear," she said with a cold smile, "family is everything. It's important to make sure the right people inherit what belongs to them." I felt a chill. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, nothing," she said with a forced smile, "just a little advice. You can never be too careful." I nodded, dismissing Mrs. Walters's manipulative words. I knew she was trying to upset me, but I had no idea just how far their plans went. Days passed, and the tension only grew. David came home late on the fourth day, tired but happy to be back. "How did everything go?" he asked, hugging me. "It was fine, but Sarah and your mom stopped by a couple of times," I told him, trying to stay calm. "Strange?" he asked, looking worried. "They were really focused on our future and what it means for family," I said, watching his face change. David sighed and rubbed his neck. "They can be overwhelming, but don't let it bother you. We're building our life together, and that's what matters." But deep down, I felt something was wrong. Just when I thought I could relax, the door swung open. Sarah and Mrs. Walters were standing there with a group of lawyers. Their faces looked determined. "Emma," Sarah said, her voice cold, "we need to talk." Before I could say anything, the lawyers started unfolding papers. My heart raced as I realized this was it, the moment I'd feared. The storm was here, and I wasn't ready. "David, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Stay calm, Emma," David said, looking just as shocked as I felt. I knew everything was about to change. The room was tense as Sarah and Mrs. Walters stood at the door, with the lawyers holding folders. My heart raced, and I looked at David, who seemed just as confused. "Emma," Sarah said with fake sweetness, "we need to talk about the house." I felt a chill. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to stay calm. One of the lawyers stepped forward. "Mrs. Walters and Miss Walters are here to present legal documents about this property. We believe it was transferred to Mrs. Walters by David before his death." "What?" I gasped, unable to understand what was happening. "David isn't dead," David said, looking pale. "This is crazy. I'm right here." Ignoring him, the lawyer continued. "The documents say that since Emma can't have children, David wanted to keep the property in the family, so he signed it over to his mother." I felt the floor drop beneath me. "David would never do that," I yelled, turning to him. "Is this true?" David shook his head. "No, Emma, I would never sign anything without talking to you first. This is a mistake." Mrs. Walters stepped forward, pretending to be kind. "Oh, Emma, it's just business. Family comes first. We have to think about the future." "Family?" I shouted. "You've always treated me like an outsider. You never cared about us until now." "Enough," Sarah snapped. "This isn't about your feelings. It's about what's rightfully ours. Step aside." I felt like everything was falling apart. I couldn't believe they'd go this far. The lawyers started looking through the papers, and I could feel the walls closing in. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, David stepped forward, his voice strong. "You think you can just take everything? You've underestimated me and Emma." The room felt charged as he pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "I have proof," he said. "I've been recording conversations because I suspected something was wrong with you too." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her calm attitude cracking. David's voice grew firmer. "I know about your plans. I know you were trying to take the house and my assets." Mrs. Walters's face turned red with anger. "You have no right to talk to your mother like that. You're being dramatic." "Drama?" David shot back. "You and Sarah have been plotting behind my back. I'm done letting you manipulate me." David played the recordings, and I felt sick as I heard their voices talking about how they were using my inability to have children to take advantage of me. As each recording played, their confident faces slowly drained of color. "This isn't over," Sarah hissed, her voice full of anger. "You'll regret this." Before I could reply, David had already called the police. "I'm pressing charges for fraud and conspiracy," he said firmly. As the sirens approached, Mrs. Walters turned to me, desperation in her eyes. "Emma, please don't let this happen. We're family. We can work this out." "Family?" I said, standing tall. "You've never treated me like family. You tried to take everything from me. I'm not backing down." The doorbell rang, and the police rushed in. "We got a report of a disturbance. What's going on here?" one officer asked, taking in the scene. David stepped forward, pointing at Mrs. Walters and Sarah. They've been trying to take my property and assets through fraud. They've conspired against us. The officers quickly assessed the situation, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The truth was finally coming out, and for the first time, I felt grounded. As the officers handcuffed Sarah and Mrs. Walters, their faces twisted in shock and anger, I couldn't help but feel both scared and empowered. The battle wasn't over, but this was the first step in taking back control. With David by my side, I realized we were ready to fight for our future. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about everything we had together. As the police led them away, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: relief, anger, and strength. David stood beside me, his face a mixture of determination and concern. "Are you okay, Emma?" he asked softly, resting his hand on my shoulder. "I will be," I replied, taking a deep breath. "I can't believe how far they went to take everything from us." David nodded, his voice firm. "We'll get through this together, you and me, remember?" The police officers finished taking statements and assured us they would investigate further. As the door closed behind them, a new kind of silence filled the house, not one of tension or deceit, but a sense of clarity. "Can you believe this happened?" I said, shaking my head. "It's like I was living in a nightmare." David took my hands, looking into my eyes. "Emma, we're done living in fear. This is our home. No one has the right to take it from us." With the weight of their betrayal lifted, we decided to heal. David suggested we take a trip, just the two of us, to reconnect and remind ourselves why we fell in love. "Let's get away for a bit," he said, his eyes full of hope. "I want to show you how much you mean to me." That weekend, we packed our bags and headed to a cozy cabin in the mountains. The scenery was stunning, and as we settled in, I felt peace like I hadn't in so long. We spent our days hiking, exploring, and talking about everything: our dreams, our future, and how we'd build a family together. One night, by the fire, David spoke from the heart. "Emma, I know we've been through a lot, but you are my priority. We'll find a way to have the family we both want, whether it's through adoption or naturally. We're in this together." Tears filled my eyes as I leaned into him, feeling his love surround me. "I can't wait for our future, David. I finally feel like we can build something without their shadows hanging over us." When we returned home, we felt renewed. We decided to begin the adoption process, a step we had always talked about but never pursued. It felt like the right move forward, a way to fill our home with love and joy. As we embraced this new chapter, I found happiness in the little things: decorating the house, planning our future, and the thought of welcoming a child. The memories of Sarah and Mrs. Walters began to fade, replaced by hope for what was to come. Our lives were no longer clouded by betrayal but brightened by endless possibilities. David and I were stronger than ever, ready for whatever adventures the future held. I realized that sometimes, you have to fight for what you love. The experience had changed me, but it also showed me the strength of our bond. As we closed the door on the past, I knew we were ready to face whatever came next, hand in hand, hearts united, and full of love.